now has turned out, what would you have done differently?
Whew. Well, I mean, for starters, we would have tried to do it differently. I mean, we've had different stakeholders, maybe not even do it at all.
Mr. Sorensen? Got a microphone right there, Ted.
Sir, I'm Ted Sorensen, a retired lawyer. By coincidence, 50 years ago last night, a candidate for president of the United States, who would later become the first Catholic president of the United States, was speaking, sitting up on a platform much as you are, to a group of Protestant ministers, pleading for religious tolerance and trying to explain the position of the Catholic Church. Like you, he had to face hostile questions and a wealth of misinformation. And he found himself forced to explain or defend so-called extremist statements made, as he said, in other countries in other centuries, which didn't apply at all, whether the words were infallibility or obedience or whatever. Words are part of the problem. I don't think that the misinformation to which he referred and to which you referred is necessarily deliberate. People in this country know very little about Islam, just as they knew fairly little about Catholicism. People don't know the difference between Islam or even jihadist.
Ted, I'm going to interrupt if we've got to get to a question.
Yeah, the question is, I don't think people are being extremist when they oppose a jihadist community center in Lower Manhattan. But can you explain to them why a Muslim center is not the same as a jihadist center?
Thank you. Fortunately, Ted, I can't run for U.S. president since I was not born in this country. That's a good question. I'm not at all suggesting that people who are against the center are in fact radicals or extremists. That's a gross misinterpretation, not at all what I have intended or meant. There is a lot of unawareness, obviously, in this country, which is why I urge people to understand it, read my book for that matter, and seek to understand what we're all about. But it's also important for people to understand what are the causes of something. Many people, for example, believed falsely that the problems in Ireland between Protestants and Catholics were a religious issue. If you study Catholic theology or Protestant theology, you'll not find the sources of the problems in Ireland. The problems were due to an imbalance between the Protestants and the Catholics in the power and economics pie. What happens in much discourse is that religion gets sucked in. Religious identities become part of the different groups that are combating or competing for the same assets. So it's important for us in our discourse to be able to not only explain that, but find ways to resolve the problem, because people think, oh, it's about religion, and therefore push religion away. If we don't identify the problems correctly, we can create false solutions and create worse problems. And in many respects, that has been part of the discourse right now on this issue and on Islam, and on the relationship between the West and the Muslim world. And those are the perceptions and the understandings that we need to correct.
Yes, ma'am, in the second row.
I actually have a question. I have a question for Richard, which is you asked the Imam what Muslims should do to stop extremists. And I'm interested to know, here in New York, we had people across the political spectrum, from Sarah Palin to Harry Reid, basically ask a religious group to move their place of worship to, not to avoid hurting the feelings of other people. And it seems like when we go down that slippery slope, we're setting an environment up that helps to breed extremists. And as one of the preeminent foreign policy institutions in the country, what does the Council on Foreign Relations plan to do to help?
Okay. Let me just say the Council on Foreign Relations does not take positions on this or any other issue for all the obvious reasons. I would just say, speaking personally, and it gets to the essence of the first question I asked Imam Feisal, is I personally believe that this is not a question about rights. I think that the right is clear. The question here is, and given the larger agenda that he personally has and the Cordoba Initiative have, is the exercise of rights. And how does one go about an exercise of rights in a way that serves the larger interests of building bridges between Muslims and non-Muslims, about integrating Muslims ever more fully into the American way of life, about reducing rifts between the United States and the rest of the world. And I think going forward, we are where we are. We can't undo how we got to this point. And to me, the policy question, quite honestly, that is really for you, not for me, and I don't mean to rehash it, is moving forward. How do we manage this in a way that serves all those interests? And again, I think we've passed the point where this is about rights and the existence of rights, and I think it's about the exercise of them. And one doesn't always have to exercise rights 100%. One always has the option of exercising rights in different ways in order to pursue or further larger agendas. You don't have to respond, but that is
Well, what I would like to point out is that the lady asked a very important question, point to a very important reality, and that is that the discourse is shaped not only by what Muslims say, but by non-Muslims say and do. And because America is the global superpower today, many Americans don't realize it, but our example speaks loudly to the whole world. What happens here speaks loudly to the whole world. And what happens here, what non-Muslims do here and say here, matters to the Muslim world. So we cannot de-link. They are linked. What happens here will have ripple effects by whomever is doing it. And that's part of what makes the calculus so complicated.
Sure. Marty Gross?
Thank you. You're a teacher, and I'm also a teacher. And the relationship between teacher and student is a precious one. In fact, you're a religious teacher. I'm dealing with an asymmetry whereby the act of putting your center where you are at the moment appears as a form of a desecration to those people who think it is hallowed ground. How does the process of teaching work when the students take this perception of the teacher to the teaching process the teacher wants to bring to the students?
Brilliant question. First of all, it is absolutely disingenuous, as many have said, that block is hallowed ground. As Clyde Haberman and many people have educated and taught and tried to teach the public, both Muslim and non-Muslim, that, with a strip joint around the corner, with bedding parlors, to claim that it's hallowed ground, it's hallowed ground in one sense, but it doesn't add. So let's clarify that misperception. But the important part of what I'm trying to do and my work is that I need a space. I want a space where the voice of the moderates can be amplified. It's not good enough to teach where no students will hear you. We need to create a platform where the voice of moderate Muslims will be amplified. Everybody wants this. Non-Muslims want the voices of moderate Muslims to be amplified, and moderate Muslims want the voices of moderates to be amplified. In a paradoxical sense, or maybe in a poignant sense, this is an opportunity that we must capitalize on, so that those who teach moderation will have a megahorn to preach and to teach the voices of moderation. And I have been successful, and I have proven it with people from my community, because I know which verses to quote from the Quran. I know how Muslims think. I know how to speak to them. I know how to shoot holes in their arguments as to what it is and what isn't, the teachings of the Quran and our faith and his example. The Prophet was told, the Quran tells the Prophet, we did not send you except to be a mercy to nations. If we are not a mercy to nations, we are not following in the footsteps of the Prophet, and that is one of the highest ideals that Muslims take upon themselves.
Sir, we've got time for probably one last question. You've been patient, yes. Just identify yourself. Keep it short.
Sure. Peter Fedinsky, Voice of America. At a recent demonstration near Ground Zero opposing the Islamic Center, there was a banner behind the stage that said, "Stop Sharia law before it stops you." And I would venture to say that many of the concerns of those present were not only the plane slamming into the Twin Towers, but minor things like women refusing to unveil themselves for a driver's license, and then major things like news of stonings, of honor killings, and then some people would say that the Cordoba in history was a place of Muslim conquest. So the question is, what is the compatibility of Sharia law with American constitutional law?
Absolutely coincident, first of all. And I've written about it and have lectured about it. The fundamental rights, the opening lines of the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The equality of human creation is a fundamental principle of the Abrahamic faiths. Endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. The fact that the Creator gave these rights to us, not any government or man-made agency, is a religious concept, among which are life, liberty, and property, then changed to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. 7 centuries before these words were penned by Thomas Jefferson, Muslim jurists said all of Sharia law, all of Islamic law, is intended to uphold 6 fundamental objectives: the protection of life, of human dignity, which I relate to liberty, to religion, to family, to property, and the intellect. And what do we do after life to pursue our happiness? We get married to our loved ones, we seek material well-being, we seek our intellectual pursuits, and we seek to practice our faith religions. In many respects, yes, there are aspects of Sharia law which we ourselves have trouble with. But in many respects, we practice Sharia law already. When we adhere to our dietary laws, we are practicing Sharia law. When we bequeath our estates to our children in accordance with the dictates of Sharia, we are consistent with American law and consistent with Islamic law. When we pray, when we fast, these are all commandments of Sharia law. So 90% of Sharia law is fully compatible, not only compatible, is consistent or compatible with American constitutional law and American laws. The areas of difference are small and minor. And by the way, Islamic jurists have said from the earliest of times, because Muslim communities lived as minorities, first in Abyssinia and Ethiopia at the time of the Prophet. And they said that wherever Muslims are minority, they are required to follow the laws of the land. It is a requirement of the Sharia to follow the laws of the land. There's much more I can say about this, but I think this covers the ground for the time being.
We will not settle all matters of Islamic jurisprudence this morning, nor all matters of politics. Let me thank you all for coming. Let me apologize for those whose questions were not answered. Let me thank Imam Feisal for coming here this morning, for his thoughtful remarks, and for answering our questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. I'll follow Richard.
Hey, Michael.